Maya Houston had always been a woman of strength, even in her silence. A retired federal judge, she had seen the worst the world could offer and fought against it with every ounce of her being. Yet here she was, in the quiet solitude of her suburban home, surrounded by memories of a past she'd left behind. The walls of her home were lined with awards, commendations, and letters from those she had helped, but none of them had prepared her for the calm that came after decades of relentless work. It was a kind of peace, but one that carried weight, heavy with the knowledge that the world still needed the kind of justice she had once delivered. Maya sat by her window, her eyes scanning the street below. She had always been sharp, observant. Her instincts told her everything she needed to know about a person in seconds, a skill honed over years in the courtroom. That's when she saw him, Kyle Carter, a man who had been making rounds in the neighborhood. He didn't know it yet, but he was about to meet someone who had spent a lifetime putting away criminals just like him. His smooth charm and calculated words would be no match for the one person who could see right through him. As the sun set over the horizon, Maya's mind was already turning, calculating the next move. The calm she had worked so hard to preserve was about to be shattered. Maya was a force of nature, and the game was about to begin. The sound of Maya's doorbell broke the stillness of the afternoon, sending a ripple through the air. It was a sound she had grown accustomed to, but this time, something about it felt different. She opened the door to find Kyle Carter standing there, all smiles and smooth words, a man whose charm was as calculated as the suit he wore. Kyle introduced himself as a real estate agent, offering a proposal she hadn't asked for. Maya listened, her sharp eyes taking in every movement, every word that fell from his lips. There was something in the way he spoke, a hidden urgency beneath his polished demeanor. The sale of her property, he said, could change her life. But Maya wasn't one to be easily swayed by promises of quick wealth or grand opportunities. She had dealt with far more deceptive characters in her lifetime than Kyle could imagine. As he rattled on about the benefits of signing the contract, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The offer was too good to be true, the terms too vague. There was no rush in her heart, only a quiet, knowing caution. She invited him in, not because she was interested, but because she was always 2 steps ahead. Maya knew how to read people, and the more Kyle spoke, the more she realized that his well-crafted pitch hid something darker beneath the surface. The game was on, but Maya wasn't just any player. She had played this game her entire life, and she always knew how it would end. Days passed, and Kyle's visits became more frequent. His offers grew more appealing with each conversation, yet Maya's doubts deepened. She wasn't one to trust easily, and something in Kyle's persistence felt off, like a predator circling its prey. There was a certain urgency in his tone that suggested he had more to gain than she did. Each word seemed carefully chosen, each gesture too rehearsed. Maya's mind raced. She had spent decades in a courtroom, listening to liars and manipulators. She had seen their tricks, their games. And Kyle, he was no different. He was playing his hand, but Maya wasn't ready to show hers yet. Her instincts kicked in, pulling her away from the idea of a simple property deal. Instead of listening to Kyle's every word, she began observing his every movement. There was something strange in the way he looked around her home, as if assessing more than just the value of the house. It was in the fleeting glances, the tiny pauses when his eyes lingered too long on certain pieces of furniture, the doorways, as though he was scouting not just her property, but something else entirely. Maya didn't need a contract to know that something was wrong. She could feel it in her bones, the kind of knowledge that came from years of seeing through facades. Kyle had underestimated her, thinking she was just an old woman. But what he didn't know was that Maya had been trained to see what others could not. The game had begun, and this time, it was her turn to make the rules. Maya's life had always been a balance of calculated risks and sharp judgment, but Kyle, with his persistent charm and smooth talk, was starting to nudge her out of her comfort zone. Every visit seemed to push her further, his offers becoming increasingly tempting. Yet Maya felt the weight of each decision, knowing that one wrong move could tip the scales. She spent her days observing him from a distance, analyzing his every move, every word he spoke. There was always an air of rehearsed precision around him, like a well-constructed mask hiding a deeper intention. She knew the signs. She had seen them in countless courtrooms. Kyle was a man with something to hide. But the question was, what? As the days passed, Maya grew more certain of one thing. He was after more than just her property. She began to turn her sharp gaze inward, contemplating her next step. She had built a life from understanding people, reading them like a book. And now she was preparing to write the next chapter of this unfolding drama. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about control. It was about power. And it was about showing Kyle that there was one person in this town who wouldn't be easily swayed by a man's charm and polished words. Maya had been a judge for decades, but now she would play a different role. The game had shifted, and Kyle had no idea what he was about to face. The following week, Maya's suspicions reached a new height. Every moment she spent around Kyle only deepened her conviction that something was amiss. It wasn't just his persistence that troubled her, but the subtle shifts in his demeanor. There was an underlying pressure in his smile, an edge to his words that didn't quite fit the friendly exterior he tried so hard to project. The more she observed, the more she realized that Kyle wasn't just trying to get her property. He was maneuvering through her life with an ease that only someone with a hidden agenda could manage. But Maya wasn't one to be easily manipulated. Her mind, honed by years of serving as a federal judge, was always 5 steps ahead. Maya began to make small adjustments in her routine, testing Kyle's reactions, watching how he adapted to changes. Each small shift revealed a little more about him. His unease when she mentioned consulting her lawyer, his faint impatience when she took longer than expected to make a decision. It was clear now. Kyle had come to take control, but not in the way he thought. Maya knew this was no longer about property. It was about power, a game of who would outsmart the other. She could feel it building, like the calm before a storm. Maya was ready to fight back. And Kyle? He had no idea what was coming next. Maya stood by the window once more, her gaze lingering on the street outside. The world seemed oblivious to the war that was quietly unfolding in her own life. Kyle's visits had become more frequent, each one bringing a new layer to his carefully constructed story. Yet Maya knew better than to be swayed by the surface-level charm. Beneath it all, she could sense the tension, the threads of something far darker. Maya had always believed in the power of observation. In her years as a judge, she had learned that true power came not from speaking, but from watching, from understanding the subtleties of a person's movements. She had been trained to detect the smallest inconsistencies, the unspoken truths that were hidden behind polished facades. And Kyle, despite his best efforts, was no exception. As the days passed, Maya began to withdraw further into herself, not out of fear, but out of a growing realization that she was in control. Every conversation with Kyle, every offer he made, became a puzzle she could solve. And with each piece that fell into place, the picture became clearer. Maya wasn't just a retired judge anymore. She was a woman on a mission, one who had the power to outsmart anyone who dared challenge her. Kyle had underestimated her. The game was no longer about the house. It was about the struggle for control, the silent battle that would soon erupt. The days blurred into one another as Maya continued to watch Kyle from the edges of her world. His visits became more strategic, more calculated. But Maya was far from fooled. She could see the pattern now, the subtle manipulations, the way he danced around the truth with smooth words. What was once a simple offer had now become an elaborate game, and Kyle was playing his part, unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. Maya, however, had no intention of being a pawn. She wasn't just sitting back, observing. She was making her own moves, her own plans. She knew that, in the world she had inhabited for so long, things were rarely as they seemed. She understood the importance of silence, of patience. It wasn't just about the house anymore. No, the stakes had risen. Kyle was chasing something more than property. He was chasing control, dominance. But Maya wasn't some helpless woman waiting to be swept up in his plans. She was a force in her own right, and she had seen enough in her lifetime to recognize the signs of manipulation. Her next steps were deliberate, careful, each one designed to test Kyle further. She knew the more pressure she applied, the more he would reveal. And Maya, with her sharp mind, was prepared to uncover the truth. Kyle thought he was the one in charge, but in reality, he had no idea what kind of game he had stepped into. The tables were about to turn, but Maya wasn't in a rush. She was waiting for the perfect moment. Maya's house, once a sanctuary of peace, now felt like the eye of a storm. The calm was deceiving, an illusion wrapped in layers of uncertainty. Every part of her life was methodically shifting, like pieces on a chessboard. Kyle's intentions had become clearer to her now, though he still didn't realize how well she had seen through his facade. The more he pressed, the more Maya resisted, her strength growing silently behind the scenes. Her days were filled with calculated actions, phone calls to old friends, quiet research, small adjustments to her routine. Each step brought her closer to understanding what Kyle truly wanted. But Maya didn't need to rush. She knew the art of patience better than anyone. Time, after all, was the most powerful weapon in any battle. Kyle, on the other hand, seemed to grow more desperate with every passing day. His polished demeanor began to crack, his offers more insistent, his promises more forceful. But Maya wasn't fooled. She had seen it all before. People like Kyle were always hungry for more, and their hunger made them reckless. Maya's mind was a quiet storm, plotting, planning, waiting. The moment would come when Kyle would no longer hold the upper hand. But Maya wasn't in a rush. She had learned long ago that the best victories were the ones that were quietly earned, not loudly announced. She would wait. And when the moment came, she would strike. The days seemed to stretch endlessly, but Maya's resolve only grew stronger. The more she watched Kyle, the more she began to understand the depth of his plans. His movements, once so careful and controlled, now seemed hurried, almost frantic. Every time he walked away, Maya felt the subtle shift in the air, like the tension of an impending storm. It was clear now. His confidence was beginning to waver. Maya had always known that people in power rarely saw their own weaknesses. Kyle was no exception. His attempts to manipulate her had grown bolder, but Maya had already built her defenses. What he didn't know was that each push he made only pushed her further into her own strategy, giving her the time she needed to gather the final pieces. What struck her most was how much Kyle had underestimated her. He thought her age and retirement were weaknesses, but Maya had always been far more than a judge. She was a tactician, a student of human nature. And now, as Kyle made his moves, she saw the cracks forming in his facade, the signs that his carefully laid plans were starting to unravel. Maya's silence became her weapon. She let Kyle push, let him think he was gaining ground. But in reality, every step he took only brought him closer to the trap she had set for him. The game was nearing its climax, but Maya was in no hurry. She knew that timing, above all, would determine the winner. The sun dipped beneath the horizon, casting long shadows over the quiet house. Maya stood at her window, watching as the world around her carried on, unaware of the storm that was quietly brewing in the corners of her life. The calm had become familiar now, almost comforting, yet she could feel the weight of every passing moment. Every subtle movement Kyle made brought her closer to the endgame, but she wasn't concerned. Maya knew the value of silence. It was in these moments of stillness that true power revealed itself. While Kyle had been busy tightening his grip, Maya had been biding her time, observing his every move, understanding the depths of his desperation. The more he pushed, the more he revealed about his own insecurities. But Maya didn't need to make any sudden moves. She had already seen what she needed to. The key to her success lay not in rushing forward, but in letting Kyle believe that he was in control. The house, once a symbol of her hard-earned peace, now held the promise of a greater victory. Maya's years of experience had taught her that battles were won in the quiet spaces, the pauses between action. She knew what Kyle had planned. What he didn't know, however, was that he was playing right into her hands. Every step he took was just another inch toward his own undoing. Maya wasn't just waiting. She was making her next move, and when the time came, Kyle wouldn't see it coming. The house, though peaceful, now felt like a ticking clock. Each second stretched, heavy with anticipation. Maya moved through her days with the precision of someone who had nothing left to prove. The world outside seemed unaware of the delicate dance happening inside the walls of her home. Kyle continued his relentless pursuit, his presence an ever-growing shadow, but Maya felt no urgency. Her mind was clear, her strategy set. Every decision she made was deliberate, the smallest of movements adding up to something far greater. She had always known that true power didn't need to be flaunted. It was quietly earned, built on patience and wisdom. As Kyle's actions grew more desperate, more erratic, Maya felt the walls around him begin to close in. He was revealing his own cracks, his desire for control evident in every step he took. But Maya was calm, moving in the shadows where her true strength lay. She had learned long ago that silence spoke louder than any words could. Kyle's confidence had become his own downfall, and Maya, in her quiet observance, had seen through it all. Her plans were coming together, piece by piece. Maya had never been one to rush. She knew when the time was right, everything would fall into place. For now, she watched with the quiet assurance that only someone who had mastered the game could possess. The storm was nearing, but it wasn't here yet. Maya was still waiting, and her moment was fast approaching. The days moved with a quiet elegance, each one unfolding slowly, deliberately. Maya's life had become a rhythm, each movement part of a greater, unseen dance. The house, once filled with the noise of her past decisions, now stood as a monument to her patience. Outside, the world continued as usual, rushing, unaware of the stillness within. Kyle's actions, once so calculated, had begun to show signs of wear. His earlier confidence seemed to crack, like the surface of a lake that had been disturbed by unseen forces beneath. But Maya wasn't fooled by his surface-level discomfort. She knew better than anyone that true change wasn't always visible to the eye. It was the small things that mattered, the subtle shifts in tone, the way his eyes flickered when they met hers, the slightest tremor in his voice when he spoke of his plans. As time passed, Maya's presence in the house grew stronger, more rooted. Every movement she made was intentional, each glance, each step, reinforcing the silent fortress she was building around herself. Kyle's influence had diminished, as if the more he tried, the further he pushed himself from her world. Maya didn't need to make grand gestures. She knew that the true power lay in the space between the words, in the way time bent to her will. She was biding her time, not in desperation, but in the quiet assurance that she was already in control. The world around her may have been moving fast, but Maya was standing still, watching it unfold with a knowing smile. Maya moved through her days with a calmness that was both serene and unsettling. The house, once filled with the chaos of uncertainty, had become a sanctuary of control. The world outside continued on its path, unaware of the quiet revolution taking place in the silence of her home. Kyle's attempts to assert his power had grown bolder, but there was something about his actions that felt off. It wasn't just the desperation creeping into his movements. It was the realization that he had underestimated her. Every time he tried to corner her, Maya's response was measured, poised, and more effective than he realized. She wasn't rushing. There was no need to. Every action she took was a step closer to the inevitable end. The time for grand gestures had passed. Now was the time for small, deliberate movements, each one designed to further shift the balance in her favor. Kyle didn't see it yet, but Maya had already moved beyond him. His attempts to control the narrative had only woven a tighter web around him, one that he couldn't escape. In the stillness of the night, Maya often sat by the window, her eyes gazing out at the stars. The world seemed distant, but to her, it felt like the perfect reflection of the life she was crafting. Calm, yet filled with infinite possibilities. She was the architect of her own future now, and no one, not even Kyle, could disrupt her course. The days stretched on, each one a quiet echo of the last. Maya's world had become a rhythm, steady and unyielding. The house, once a battlefield, had transformed into a sanctuary, her sanctuary. Kyle's presence, though still constant, no longer had the same weight. His attempts to exert control had become predictable, and Maya had already moved beyond him. Her steps were measured, deliberate, and each one seemed to deepen her resolve. The space around her had grown more profound, as if the very walls were bending to her will. She didn't need to speak. Her actions alone commanded attention. The house had become an extension of her thoughts, calm, unshakable, and precise. Kyle, in his pursuit of power, had failed to realize one crucial thing. It was the quiet that gave Maya her strength. While he roared with force, she moved in silence, her every move a careful stroke in a masterpiece only she could see. As he tightened his grip, the walls around him continued to close in, invisible to his eyes but undeniable in their presence. Maya had mastered the art of waiting, knowing that some victories didn't require a fight. The key to power, she understood, was not in forcing an outcome, but in controlling the flow of events. Time, it seemed, was Maya's greatest ally. With every passing day, she was one step closer to reshaping the world around her. Quietly, without fanfare, but with absolute certainty. This chapter keeps the suspense building while maintaining a smooth, engaging flow. Let me know how it works, and I'll continue with the next one. The house, now an almost sacred place of calm, seemed to breathe in sync with Maya's every move. The weight of her decisions was invisible to those who walked through the halls, but it was there, ever present, like a quiet storm. Every room held a quiet power, a subtle transformation that Kyle was too distracted to notice. Maya didn't need loud gestures or overt actions. Her presence alone had begun to shape the space, creating a stillness that spoke volumes. She walked through the rooms as if she were in a world of her own, untouched by the turbulence outside. There was something magnetic about her quiet confidence, something that made it impossible for anyone to overlook her. While Kyle continued to rush through his days, trying to reclaim control, Maya's every step was a carefully chosen one. She had become a master of her own time. No longer was she tethered to the urgency of his movements. Instead, she moved at her own pace, letting the world catch up with her. There was a peculiar beauty in her silence, something that made her more powerful than anyone could imagine. It wasn't the noise of battle that shaped her. It was the space between each moment, the calm before the storm, that allowed her to prepare for whatever came next. Kyle might have been blind to it for now, but Maya knew something he didn't. The quiet had always been the truest form of strength. Maya's world had become a slow dance of control, each step deliberate, measured. The house had transformed from a place of tension to a place of quiet authority, as if it too had learned to move to her rhythm. There were no grand declarations, no sweeping gestures. Instead, there was a profound stillness, the kind that spoke louder than any words ever could. As the days passed, Maya's understanding of her surroundings deepened. She could feel the subtle shifts, the slight changes that went unnoticed by others. Kyle's presence had become more frantic, but Maya moved through the chaos with a grace that felt almost natural. She was no longer fighting to be heard. Her silence was her voice, and it was louder than anything he could say. The house, once filled with his clumsy attempts at dominance, had become a reflection of her mind, sharp, focused, and unyielding. Maya's quiet resolve was shaping the space, her presence slowly erasing the last traces of the disorder Kyle had created. What had once seemed like a battle was now a waiting game, one that only she knew how to win. The world outside continued as it always had, unaware of the storm brewing in this small corner. Maya didn't need to speak. Her actions, though quiet, were shifting the course of everything around her. The power she had always possessed was now becoming impossible to ignore, and Kyle, in his frantic pursuit of control, would soon realize he was already too late. Maya's life had begun to move with a quiet intensity, like a river flowing under a still surface. Every movement, every decision, was carefully calculated, yet effortless. The house had become her kingdom, and she ruled it with a presence that seemed to bend time itself. There was no need for noise. Her actions spoke volumes, and the world around her was starting to notice. Kyle, still lost in his frantic attempts at control, could sense something shifting in the air. But every time he reached for it, it slipped from his grasp, like sand running through his fingers. Maya's silence had become her armor, and behind it, her power was growing, unnoticed but undeniable. The walls of the house, once a battlefield, now whispered of her quiet dominance. The rooms felt different now, as if they too had surrendered to her will. There was no resistance anymore, only acceptance. Even the smallest details seemed to fall into place as though guided by an unseen hand. Maya didn't have to force anything. It all just was. Her days unfolded like a series of quiet triumphs, each one unnoticed by the chaos that still surrounded her. But Maya knew. She didn't need the world to acknowledge her. She didn't need anyone to see the careful precision with which she had built her world. It was hers, and that was enough. In the silence, Maya had learned the most valuable lesson of all. True strength doesn't need to be loud. It thrives in the spaces where others cannot see. Time had become a curious thing in Maya's world, an endless loop of calm and clarity. Her days no longer felt like they were passing in a rush. Instead, they seemed to stretch and expand, allowing her to move through them with unhurried precision. The house, now her sanctuary, was a reflection of this newfound peace. Each corner, each room, held a subtle power, a power that had come from silence, patience, and unwavering strength. Kyle, still trapped in his own turmoil, moved through the house like a storm, unaware that the calm was no longer something to fear. Maya's influence was undeniable, though he couldn't yet see it. His frantic energy collided with the quiet of her world, but no matter how much he fought it, the quiet remained. The house had become a battleground of sorts, though not in the way Kyle had imagined. It wasn't about shouting, demanding, or forcing things into place. It was about letting things flow, about creating a space where everything could find its rhythm. And in this rhythm, Maya had found her strength. Her presence was like a force of nature, silent, subtle, yet impossible to ignore. In every moment, she was becoming more than just a survivor of the chaos. She was its quiet architect. For Maya, the path forward was clear. It was never about overpowering or being seen. It was about knowing who she was and standing firm in her truth, even when no one else could see it. Maya stood at the window, watching the world outside move in a constant rush. The world she had left behind, the noise, the chaos, the constant demand for attention, it all felt so distant now. Here, in her space, time had a different rhythm. Each breath she took was in sync with the pulse of her surroundings, quiet yet filled with purpose. The air in the house was thick with anticipation. It was a subtle feeling, one that didn't scream for attention but lingered in the corners, like a whisper just out of reach. Maya had learned long ago that the most powerful forces in life weren't the ones that shouted for attention. They were the ones that moved quietly, steadily, beneath the surface. Kyle, still lost in his own struggles, had no idea what was happening around him. His actions were becoming more erratic, his decisions more impulsive. But Maya was no longer reacting. She simply observed, her gaze steady, her mind sharp. In her silence, she had found an undeniable strength. She had learned to listen not just to words, but to the spaces between them. In those quiet spaces, she could hear everything she needed to know. And as the days passed, Maya knew that the balance was shifting. She wasn't waiting for something to happen. She was already becoming everything she had ever needed to be. Maya felt the change before she saw it. The air in the room was different, charged in a way that made her senses sharpen. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was the subtle shift that came when things began to fall into place, when everything aligned just enough for the first time. The space she'd created was hers now, untouched and free from the chaos of the past. It was a sanctuary, a place where the noise of the world couldn't reach. Yet, even in the stillness, she could feel the tension in the house building. Kyle, unaware of the currents beneath the surface, moved about, his actions becoming more frantic with each passing day. But Maya remained calm, her gaze steady, her purpose clear. The beauty of it all lay in the quiet strength she carried. In the past, she would have reacted, perhaps fought back against the noise and the disarray. But now, there was no need. The power she had was in her presence, in her stillness. She didn't need to shout or make waves. She simply had to be. And slowly, Kyle began to feel it. The way the world around him had shifted ever so slightly. His frantic energy collided with Maya's calm, and though he didn't understand it yet, he couldn't ignore it. There was something about her now, something he couldn't quite name, but couldn't dismiss either. In the silence of the house, the currents were shifting, slowly but surely. Maya was no longer waiting for the storm to pass. She was becoming the storm itself. The days had stretched into weeks, and with each passing moment, Maya felt herself becoming something she hadn't expected, something stronger, more defined. It wasn't just the peace she had found within herself, but the understanding of the power that came with it. She had learned to move through the world not with force, but with purpose. Kyle, in his pursuit of control, remained restless. His every action was an attempt to wrestle with an unseen force, an energy he couldn't comprehend. The walls around him seemed to close in, but he refused to acknowledge it. His world was getting smaller, but he couldn't see the way out. Maya, however, was different. She had learned to listen, to the whispers of the world, to the silent spaces where truth lived. And in these moments of stillness, something remarkable was unfolding. The house, once a battleground for emotions, now stood as a quiet testament to Maya's resolve. The shadows, once oppressive, seemed to fade in her presence. Her strength didn't come from confronting the chaos. It came from understanding it, from moving through it with grace. Kyle had no idea what was happening to him. He felt the weight of his actions but couldn't place why everything felt so foreign. It was as though Maya's calm had carved a path, one he couldn't see but could feel with every step he took. There was no anger in her anymore, only a quiet certainty that everything was falling into place, just as it was meant to. The house was quieter now. What once felt like constant turmoil had shifted into something different, something almost unrecognizable. Maya had become a quiet force within these walls. Her presence was no longer just something that filled the space. It was something that changed the very atmosphere around her. Every room held the weight of her journey, and Kyle could feel it, though he couldn't fully comprehend what was happening. There was no loud confrontation, no dramatic showdown, yet he felt the ground beneath him shifting. The unease in his chest grew with each passing day, but he couldn't pinpoint why. Maya, however, moved through it all with a calm that seemed to grow stronger, more unshakable. The way she handled the smallest details with grace, the way her decisions were rooted in something deeper than logic, something that felt almost otherworldly, struck him more than he cared to admit. It was as if she had unlocked a new way of being, one that he couldn't touch but could not ignore. What Kyle couldn't see was that Maya had learned the art of letting go, of stepping back while still holding her ground. She had learned that power wasn't in forcing things to happen, but in knowing when to step aside and let things unfold naturally. The world around them was changing. Maya didn't need to chase it anymore. She didn't need to prove herself. She had already become the quiet force that everything else was moving toward. Maya walked through the hallway, the faint scent of lavender in the air, her mind clear and yet filled with so much that it was hard to express. She had always been the one to navigate the chaos, but now things felt different. There was an undeniable shift, subtle yet unmistakable. Kyle was still preoccupied with his work, his mind locked in an endless loop of strategies and decisions. He hadn't noticed yet, but the balance was slowly tilting. The house, once filled with an undercurrent of tension, had begun to exude a strange serenity. It wasn't a peace that could be easily explained, but it was there. In the past, every move Maya made had been met with resistance. Every word she spoke was weighed, measured, and often dismissed. But now, her quiet confidence created a ripple effect. Without trying, she had become the force that anchored everything. And as the days passed, the walls that once felt so constricting now seemed to fade into the background. Kyle, though unaware, was beginning to sense the change. His usual need to control everything had started to feel unnecessary. Maya wasn't pushing him or demanding anything. She simply existed, and in that stillness, Kyle began to see something he had never truly noticed before. It wasn't about power or control, it was about something deeper. Maya's calmness wasn't an absence of action, but a mastery of it. The storm that would eventually come would not be from her. It would come from within him. The air was thick with anticipation, yet no one spoke a word. Maya stood by the window, her gaze fixed on the horizon. The world outside was still, but within her, everything was shifting. The peace she had carried was beginning to feel heavy, as if the calm before the storm had overstayed its welcome. Kyle walked in, his eyes searching for something, an answer, a sign, but found nothing. His usual bravado seemed hollow in this new silence. Maya's silence had always been her strength, but now it was like a barrier he couldn't break. He felt it, the distance that had grown between them. He wanted to speak, to bridge the gap, but the words caught in his throat. Maya hadn't moved an inch, her presence as firm as the earth beneath them. She wasn't going to fight him anymore, but neither was she backing down. In that moment, Kyle realized something. The storm he feared was not something external. It had always been inside him, waiting to be faced. And now, the moment had arrived.